When my neighbor, Delilah Thornburg, crushed my mailbox for the 7th time in 2 months, I knew the ceasefire was over. This wasn't coincidence anymore. This was war. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't planning to rebuild. I was planning to retaliate. At 6 in the morning, groggy from another late night fixing broken fence posts, I stepped outside. The air was thick with diesel fumes, sharp and oily in the sunrise. Where my beautiful oak mailbox once stood, handcrafted from my grandfather's original design, sanded, varnished, and perfected over 3 weekends, there was now nothing but wreckage. Splintered wood littered the street, the shards glinting in the early light like shrapnel after a blast. I dropped my coffee. The mug shattered across the driveway, the sound splintering the quiet morning, and hot liquid seared my ankles. But the real burn was in my chest, pure electric rage. There she was, Delilah, sliding into her spotless white SUV, fresh dints glaring under the dawn light, streaks of oak varnish still clinging to her chrome bumper. She didn't even look at me. Just reversed, lips pursed, like a queen retreating after an execution. The taste in my mouth was metallic, like biting down on a battery. That was the moment I decided to end this. She wanted a battle over a mailbox? Fine. I was going to build her a monument, something she'd regret ever ramming. Before we get into how the suburban Cold War started, let me rewind. My name's Marcus Ricks, 52, recently divorced, and, at the time, desperately trying to rebuild more than just furniture. 20 years in the Navy Seabees. That's the crew that builds runways and bridges in war zones while people are shooting at you. After that, civilian life was supposed to be calm. I thought peace meant owning a toolbox, mowing the lawn, and drinking my morning coffee without checking for tripwires. Retirement was meant to be quiet, but apparently, tranquility doesn't come with a mortgage. When I found the ranch-style house on Maple Street, it felt like a godsend. Solid frame, a clean yard, sun in the mornings, shade in the afternoons. The kind of home where a man could tinker in his garage and finally exhale. The real estate agent sold it as paradise. Family-friendly, low-crime, tight-knit community. What she forgot to mention was the HOA. The Willowbrook Homeowners Association, established 1987, looked innocent enough on paper. But once you moved in, you realized it was less of a neighborhood group and more of a suburban regime. They had more bylaws than the U.S. Navy and twice as many penalties. There were official colors, sanctioned mailbox heights, lawn care standards, and even specific hours for trash placement. It was absurd. The lawns looked perfect, sure, but perfection here came with a cost. Willowbrook was the sort of neighborhood that could be photographed for a real estate brochure. Rows of identical homes with glossy driveways, lawns trimmed like military buzz cuts, and hedges sculpted into suburban perfection. Every mailbox matched, same shade of approved beige, same distance from the curb, same dull personality. You could practically hear the HOA whispering through the streets. Uniformity is peace. The problem was, some people mistook control for order. And no one embodied that confusion quite like Delilah Thornburg. She was 47, blonde in the blinding, high-maintenance kind of way, always wearing heels that clicked like gavel strikes. Her SUV was her chariot, spotless even after rain. A real estate agent with prestige properties plastered across her yard sign, Delilah didn't just live in Willowbrook, she ruled it. The HOA meetings weren't gatherings. They were her court sessions. She'd stride in with a binder thicker than the Bible, quoting page numbers like scripture. People pretended to agree to avoid conflict. She wasn't elected president of the HOA. She just became it, like mold in a damp corner. The woman was obsessed with maintaining appearances. And when she decided someone didn't fit her picture-perfect vision, she made sure they regretted it. Unfortunately, the day I installed my custom oak mailbox, I unknowingly declared war on her little empire. That mailbox wasn't just a box, it was craftsmanship legacy. My grandfather had built one almost identical back in the 60s, and I'd used his blueprints. Oak frame, steel posts sunk deep into concrete, varnished to shine under morning dew. It stood proud, too proud, apparently, for Willowbrook. A week after I installed it, Delilah marched over, clipboard in hand, nails polished to match her pearl earrings. She started with that smile people wear right before they stab you in the back. "Marcus," she said sweetly, "your mailbox doesn't comply with community standards." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. The approved design, she claimed, was a regulation composite model painted beige, not oak, not stained, and definitely not handcrafted. She warned me that non-compliance could lead to corrective action. I told her I'd built bridges in war zones, and I wasn't about to replace a mailbox because she didn't like its color. Her smile cracked. From that day on, she watched me like a hawk. I caught her photographing my yard, measuring my grass, even sniffing around my recycling bins. I tried to laugh it off. Every neighborhood has one nosy neighbor. But Delilah wasn't nosy. She was territorial. And the more she realized I wasn't intimidated, the more determined she became to make me bend. The first hit came 2 weeks later. A routine inspection from the HOA claimed my mailbox post was structurally non-compliant. I fixed it anyway. Then someone knocked it over in the night. I rebuilt it stronger. She hit it again. Over the next month, it became a pattern. Every time I restored it, I'd find it mangled, splintered, or flat against the ground. At first, I thought it was kids. Then I saw the paint, white, pearlescent, the same shade as Delilah's SUV. I kept quiet. Sometimes silence makes people show their hand. But when I woke up that morning and saw the final wreckage, my 7th mailbox reduced to toothpicks, I knew this wasn't random. She'd escalated from harassment to open provocation. My blood pressure spiked like I was back under fire overseas. She thought she could bully me into submission, make me follow her rules, or quit the neighborhood. But she'd underestimated what a man with an engineering background, a temper, and too much free time could do. I wasn't going to call the cops. I wasn't going to file a complaint. No, I was going to build something she couldn't destroy. Something that would make her regret ever backing out of her driveway. I decided reactionary fixes weren't enough. I set aside dawn repairs and built a real solution. In the garage, I spread reclaimed oak across the bench, sketched precise plans, and measured like a man cataloging coordinates for a mission. The mailbox had to be handsome and immovable. A steel spine encased in concrete, stainless bolt sunk into gravel, an oak shell hand-rubbed until it glowed. I wanted it to look like an heirloom and feel like a bunker. Overnights and weekends I sanded, planed, and sealed, the smell of varnish mixing with the grease on my hands. It was craftsmanship with intent. When the finished piece stood in my yard, dignified, heavy, and rooted, I felt a brief, foolish satisfaction, as if I'd planted a sentinel next to the curb. It wasn't a provocation. It was a declaration that I wouldn't be pushed around. That pride, I'd soon learn, would be exactly what Delilah wanted to shatter. People notice long projects on small streets. News travels on gossip and the hum of passing SUVs. Delilah started rolling by more often, slowing until her windows framed the driveway like a surveillance camera. Neighbors exchanged looks. Some smiled nervously at me, others pretended not to see. I kept working. The mailbox took on a personality. Solid, polite, unyielding. I sunk the post deep, set the concrete cures, then attached hardware that required tools and patience to remove. It looked like a piece of furniture made to resist winters and vandals alike. The first time Delilah stopped and inspected it up close, She put a hand on the wood and frowned like someone tasting bitterness. Her thin smile didn't reach her eyes. I'd hoped my handiwork would end things. Instead, it made the target clearer. She retaliated with petty cruelty. One morning, I found the oak face gouged and smeared with that pearlescent paint that matched her SUV. Whoever had tried to pry it free came away with splinters and a scuffed bumper. She began mobilizing neighbors with polished flyers and urgent-sounding emails about non-conforming structures. At HOA meetings, she read regulations like psalms, assembling minutiae into a case against my mailbox's aesthetics. She sent letters demanding removal. She cataloged every bolt I'd used as an offense. It was theater and intimidation blended, the official-sounding petitions, the carefully timed complaints. You could call it nitpicking if you wanted. I called it harassment. She wanted me to be small, to bend to color charts and petty rules. I wanted to keep my dignity and my property. Escalation slid into threats that couldn't be dismissed as neighborhood squabbles. My garage latch was jammed one night by a wrench left across it. 2 tires were slashed in the span of a week. Someone poured gasoline over the mailbox and left a mocking scorch ring on the oak, a threat that signaled willingness to burn. The concrete anchor held, but the message was clear. The next hit would be uglier. Sleep became more careful. I walked the perimeter at dawn, flashlight in hand, checking for footprints, metal shards, anything that would give me a lead. I mulled calling the police, but I'd been in eyes on situations where evidence gets lost in bureaucracy. So I documented everything. Photos time-stamped on my phone, saved messages, receipts for the lumber. I was building not just a mailbox, but a paper trail. Delilah weaponized rules and law the way a litigator wields emotion. She filed a formal nuisance complaint and threatened civil enforcement, citing non-existent safety concerns and conjured precedent. The complaint was thin and performative, intended more to scare neighbors than to pass legal muster. Still, it cost time and attention. I responded in kind, by documenting, preserving, and remaining methodical. Discovery is tedious but powerful. Emails, timestamps, and witness statements grow into something that can't be shrugged off as opinion. I served requests and kept records of every interaction. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted undeniable proof. Lawsuits fold when the truth is solid. The more she leaned on the HOA and its rituals, the more I collected facts. Procedure became my shield. Not everyone stood with me publicly. Fear is contagious. Some neighbors distanced themselves rather than risk becoming collateral. Yet small acts of solidarity surfaced. A teenager named Jay mowed my lawn quietly after school. Mrs. Patel left spare hardware on my porch. Those gestures reminded me that the neighborhood was still made of people, messy and imperfect, not just regulations and binders. At board meetings, Delilah came armed with charts and a binder full of supposed violations, while I brought photos and a simple chronology of vandalism. Her polished cadence convinced some. My dog-eared notes convinced others. The division deepened, but the small kindnesses proved an important fact. There were witnesses who hated the pressure her reign created. Threats got uglier. One night someone hit the mailbox with a chain tied to a pickup. The chain snapped and left teeth marks in the oak. A crudely folded note wedged in the slot read "Watch it," its letters gouged like a threat. The first time I read the message, my stomach dropped, not from fear of damage, but fear of how far someone would go. I slept with the light on, the dog under the bed, and the door locked. I did call the police after the note, and they logged the incident, took photos, and promised to increase patrols. Their presence was reassuring but thin. Response times in small neighborhoods can be long, and evidence can be fleeting. So I doubled down on documentation, installed a small camera with a discreet angle. If someone wanted to make a spectacle, they'd have to do it on camera. Eventually we faced each other. Delilah marched onto my lawn, arms folded, and read me a litany about community standards and precedent. She spoke with the practiced cadence of someone used to presenting herself as moral authority. Everything was procedural, every accusation precise. I listened, then pointed to the chronology. 7 cable incidents, slashed tires, paint smears, a gasoline attempt. She accused me of provoking community unrest. I told her I was preserving my property. The exchange ended with her threatening legal action and me promising to pursue every permissible avenue to protect my family and home. That encounter showed me she wasn't concerned about standards. She wanted control. Delilah broadened the attack. She phoned my contractors, spread rumors about my finances, and tried to dissuade suppliers from doing business with me. She called late-night noise complaints when I worked on the mailbox, and whispered insinuations into HOA ears about my temperament. Those personal hits stung because they targeted the quieter parts of life: reputation, livelihood, trust. I had to decide whether to respond to every smear or focus on assembling the record that would matter in court. I chose the latter. So I kept spreadsheets, bank statements, vendor contacts, and copies of every complaint she filed. Patience and proof felt like slow comforts, but they are the things that make allegations crumble. The community started to fracture. Some neighbors openly sided with Delilah because it was simpler to avoid confrontation. Others came forward quietly to tell their stories. The HOA's sacred rituals, votes, petitions, enforcement notices, lost some of their sheen under scrutiny. We demanded audits, impartial oversight, and a full accounting of how decisions were made. An external mediator was brought in after a small uptick of residents signed a petition calling for fair process. The mediator wasn't dramatic, just a bureaucratic cold bath. Records, statements, calendars. The heat cooled somewhat. Delilah stormed and left meetings in a huff, but the process had started to make her maneuvers visible in a way gossip never had. Her escalation into potential arson was the tipping point. The scorched ring from the gasoline attempt and the chain marks were actionable. They could be forensically analyzed. I handed over photos and paint chips to the investigator. The small camera outside my garage had captured blurred footage of a figure moving under streetlight glare on several nights. Forensic work matched paint particles to a sample linked to a vehicle of interest. These were the brittle traces criminals leave when they grow reckless. The investigator's language was careful, methodical, the same language that comforts when you want truth rather than rumor. It felt vindicating to see physical evidence line up with months of petty injuries. Depositions and sworn statements changed the tenor of neighborhood life. Sitting across from a court reporter with catalog photos and a list of incidents felt oddly formal, like reading a lifetime's small wrongs into an official ledger. Neighbors who had previously feared her began to testify that they had seen her vehicle at odd hours near acts of destruction. Some admitted they'd been coerced into silence, afraid of being targeted. One contractor confessed to taking small bids and turning a blind eye to invoices. He said he'd been paid to look the other way. Watching the record grow felt like tightening a net. Each signed page made it harder for stories to be rewritten by a polished binder. At trial, the scattershot acts came together into a pattern. The prosecutor painted a picture of a woman who built influence through fear and used it to get what she wanted. There were counts of vandalism, coercion, and conspiratorial behavior. The gasoline attempt escalated toward arson charges. In the courtroom, her confident veneer cracked under cross-examination. Witnesses showed photos, receipts, and messages that tied her to efforts to silence opponents and coerce vendors. The slow accumulation of facts did what my pounding heart couldn't. It made a durable, public case. The jury watched as small cruelties aggregated into a systematic campaign. After the verdict, the neighborhood exhaled slowly. People returned to simple courtesies. The community garden got tended again, and kids played without curious glances. The HOA changed procedures, independent review panels, stricter rules on evidence for enforcement, and clearer processes for filing complaints. Those structural shifts mattered more than personal retribution. They prevented future advancement of the same toxic tactic, weaponizing petty rules. Delilah's supporters retreated into quiet resentment, but power dissolved in public view. The changes were not dramatic, but they were steady and practical. Justice had relied on documentation and persistence rather than spectacle. If you ask what I would do differently, my answer is the same: document, persist, and build. The visceral urge for dramatic revenge is tempting, but it tends to be short-lived and messy. Strategy and evidence last longer. They protect you, your neighbors, and your reputation. The Mailbox story didn't make me a hero. It made me someone who refused to be cowed by petty tyranny. I keep a simpler life now. Weekend projects, borrowed jokes at the block barbecue, and small repairs that remind me how ordinary things are worth defending. If someone out there is watching a neighbor push too far, remember that steady proof and communal courage are more formidable than a punch. Practical justice, patient, recorded, and procedural, will outlive the loudest threats.